Thank you so much for being here. So folks, we just finished our morning session on cultural fire and reclaiming those practices and getting the fire back on the landscape in a more productive way. We're going to move from the forest out to the sea and talk about a really cool story that is pretty recent and deserves more attention, in my opinion. And we're really excited to have an awesome group of speakers here to share that story with all of you. So I'm going to introduce this, and instead of you having to listen to me do a bunch of bios, we'll just let all of our speakers introduce themselves in this session. But just to set the stage for our reporters, in September of this year, on the 21st, it marks an unprecedented day for Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous-led coastal conservation, as 3 federally recognized California tribal nations announced the Yurok-Talawadani Indigenous Marine Stewardship Area. It's the first ever ocean protection area designated by tribal governments in the United States. And there are some of that work is going on in Canada that we may hear a little bit about that too. But here in the United States, this is the first such stewardship area. The Reessaguinee tribe of Yurok people, the Talawadani Nation, and the Churai Heights Indian community of the Trinidad Rancheria each took action to protect nearly 700 square miles of their ancestral ocean and coastal territories and waters to advance long-term tribal stewardship and governance, as well as tribal and state co-management of critical ecosystems to protect and support cultural lifeways and economies. The effort will directly address climate impacts and help the state of California achieve its biodiversity and durable conservation goals by 2030. And the stewardship area stretches from the Oregon-California border to just south of Trinidad and Humboldt County, which is about 290 miles north of San Francisco. So that is what we're here to talk about, and we're thrilled to have all of you join us to share that story. From the Reessaguinee tribe, Rancheria tribe, we have Chairperson Fawn C. Murphy, Executive Director Megan Roca, and Director of Governmental Affairs Shauna McCovey. From the Talawadani Nation, we have Council Member J. Tuck Steinruck. And then from the Churai Heights Indian community of the Trinidad Rancheria, we have Vice Chair Robert Hempstead, Jackie Hostler Carmizan, who's the CEO, and then Amy, whose name I did not get, but who will introduce herself shortly. So that's who we have lined up for all of you. I'm not sure who wants to go first, but I will mute myself and let you tell us all about this new stewardship area. Or maybe I should pick somebody. So since you popped up first, Megan, I'll let you guys kick things off.
Okay. Aikui Squianakoi. Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Fawn Murphy, and I'm the chairperson here at the Reessaguinee tribe of Yurok people. And I'm happy to be here to share this very exciting, monumentous, I don't know what you would call it. We're reclaiming our sovereignty. I mean, we're exercising our sovereignty, reclaiming our space in the marine, reclaiming marine space. Anyways, I just wanted to share how it was on California Indian Day to be able to announce this, and it was the highlight of, I'd say, so far of this year. It was amazing, and the unity we feel with the other tribes that are doing this with us, and just how important it is for us, for the environment. As we know, we're in a critical time here, and I feel like with us reclaiming and using traditional ecological knowledge combined with Western science, we're actually going to make a difference in the ocean space. And just to put that out there, this has been one of the most positive things that we've been doing. And I just wanted to share that and to say thank you for everybody. Thank you for your time today. And yeah, we'll get into the background of it a little bit, because I think Megan Rocha, our executive director, and Shauna McCovey, our director of self-governance, started this before they even came here to the Resigini tribe, in other, places that they were working. I'm sorry, I'm feeling nervous seeing all these people and it's just us here talking. So usually I don't.
We shouldn't have it on gallery view.
Yeah.
See everyone's face.
A little intimidating, but.
Thank you, Chairperson. So I'll just introduce myself. As the Chairperson mentioned, my name's Megan Rocha, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Resigini Tribe of Yurok people. And we're just honored to be invited to speak with you all today and share a little bit about our vision and the tribe's assertion, and like the Chairperson said, reclaiming this important ocean space and tribal stewardship. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Shauna so she can introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Shauna McCovey, and I am the Director of Government Affairs for Resigini, Rancheria Tribe of Yurok people. I don't know if we should spend our initial time introducing sort of some of the background, or if we want to spend more time during the discussion talking about some of the background and what led us to make this designation.
I mean, I think that would be great, Shauna, but maybe we can first just tell everyone who they'll be hearing from. And just introduce, and then if you want to kick off that background, that would be great.
Sure, we'll do that after everyone introduces. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we can move over to our second meeting room. And I believe, the Trinidad Rancheria.
Good morning, Robert Hempstead, Vice Chairman, Trinidad Rancheria. And we thought that when we were approached by Resigini and Tolowa to work in collaboration and partnership with this, it was a very important venture to enter into and to collaborate with them and then really understand the stewardship of our local oceans and our traditional areas. For me, it's important because my ancestral descendancy is that of Yurok and Tolowa. So my family ancestral descendancy would span from Little River all the way up to the Tolowa country. So it's very important, and we were very happy to be able to participate in this and go into it and ensure that there's the environmental issues that we're having in our marine waters locally. We have a harbor area here, and there's the strong issues with the kelp beds and seaweed and nab and urchins that we're looking to hopefully be able to use traditional knowledge, incorporate that, and be able to balance that system back out to how it should have been and how it has been in the past. But we have my CEO Jackie here and Amy, Executive Director, and they're both have been great participants and a wealth of knowledge, also with a lot of background in marine protection acts and all that in the state. So we're very glad to be able to participate in this and look forward to seeing what we can make happen in the future partnerships.
All right, thanks so much. And then we still have Council Member Steinruck. If you want to just introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Can you hear me?
We can. Yep.
Okay, I see that my video is kind of frozen, so or at least my picture is up there. Anyway, I'll introduce myself. Delahan Shahushi Jaytek Steinreich, Hagiasham. Hello, my name is Jaytek Steinreich, and good morning. I am on Tolowa Dating Nation Tribal Council, and I'm the treasurer. Give you guys a little bit of background. I'm on my second term. Got elected in 2020 and re-elected in 2023. So this year, so I have a three-year longer term. So I don't know how much you guys want to go into background, or what more you want, or we can get into that discussion a little bit later. That's who I am, who I'm representing. Been working with this group of people for quite a while, in different capacities. Started as staff in our natural resources department, and then moved forward into a more leadership role and as council. So I'll leave it at that, and then we can get into other discussions later.
All right. Thanks so much. And thank you all for being here. And maybe Shauna, we will turn it back to you to kick off the discussion of how we got here, how this thing we're talking about came to be. And feel free to, hand the baton off to anyone else who you think should speak.
Sure, thank you, Adam. So there a number of people can speak, and I can hand off. But I think it's good to initially start with about in 2009, when California passed its Marine Life Protection Act initiative. We always tell this story because it was really the first time that tribes on the North Coast came together in a concerted effort to protect the marine environment, or protect our territories in the marine environment. At the time, we were considered stakeholders. The state of California said they didn't have an ability to consult with us. And so we were really sort of left out of the whole process. And so what we did on the North Coast was we mobilized, and we started doing the work. That initiative ended up in some wins for tribes, but we were still part of a state process. And I think that a lot of our work from there, I mean, we learned a lot, but a lot of our work stemming from that whole entire process was really trying to figure out how to assert our sovereignty, how to build our own programs, how to become more involved in the management, co-management of our territories, which are so important to us for traditional cultural purposes. And then I don't know if Megan has any additional background on the Marine Life Protection Act and that process that she'd like to share, or maybe Jackie, but I just, it really lit a fire under us when we realized that we were not a part of the overall process. And so so important right now that the state again, has begun to actually engage with us. I mean, they're so much better now. Obviously, a lot has changed, and a lot of work has been done from 2009, 2010 to now. But we're still in a place where we'd like to be the co-managers or managers of our marine space. And so, Megan, I'll turn it over to you to see if there's anything that I left out.
I would just say, so the Marine Life Protection Act was a state initiative, as Shauna mentioned. And, the purpose was to designate a network of marine protected areas in the entire coast of California. And like she mentioned, didn't acknowledge that tribes still had unceded rights in the ocean. And so I think that's a really big piece of this is, federal policy in Indian country has sort of changed, during different decades under different administrations, and tribes in California do not have ratified treaties. And so it's really imperative that tribes exercise their sovereignty and their tribal rights, because if you don't exercise them, they don't exist, right? So it's really critical that tribes continue to continue traditional practices and assert their claims to these spaces, because there is no federally reserved rights for California tribes that are acknowledged explicitly by the federal government. So it's you have to assert them. And so that was a consistent message throughout the Marine Life Protection Act, was that tribes never ceded these rights. These rights continue to exist, and that tribes do have traditional, I'm sorry, getting someone's background noise. It's a little distracting, sorry. And the other
we'll find it.
Okay, sorry. And the other thing that tribes really advocated strongly was that traditional stewardship has been taking care of these places since time immemorial, right? And even though that may not be codified into state or tribal law, that is law, right? That traditional knowledge is a set of protocols and laws that people live by to take care of these places. And that needs to be acknowledged in some fashion. Additionally, tribes can do Western science. Tribes have the ability and the capability to do that kind of research as well. And so the state and others really need to acknowledge those pieces. And so that was a continued message. And I think the other really powerful part about that was tribes coming together. You know, there's a lot going on in Indian country. Every tribe has unique challenges, is dealing with a lot of different pieces, right, to run a government. But for tribes to really come together and stand in a unified voice in this way to really push back was pretty monumental. And I know Trinidad Rancheria and Toloadani Nation were very key parts to that effort as well. And so it's really an honor to kind of continue that work with them in this designation of the IMSA. And I could talk more about the IMSA, but I'll pause and see if anybody else from our team would like to share any comments.
I will add to the Marine Life Protection Act era, because it was monumental in the tribes. North Coast tribes took a stand, whereas in the other regions, what we had heard was happening was that the Department of Fish and Wildlife was just steamrolling and not even listening to the tribes about their traditional areas or the areas that the fishermen really needed to not become marine reserves. And working with Shauna and Megan and other tribal leaders during this time was pivotal into the department finally started listening. And that's when I really believe at the end of that North Coast phase, we came up with a united proposal with all of the stakeholders. And it was, as Megan mentioned, it was professed tribes have never ceded their rights to the ocean. And from that, we went on through the California Fish and Game Commission to create the definition and the vision for co-management. And so we continue to move forward. It's been 14 years that we've all worked on this. So it's just really exciting to an honor to be part of the work that's being done with our partners, with the tribes.
All right, thanks for that. I'm curious if maybe Megan, you were about to jump in, just giving us kind of overview of what the protected area looks like, or the management area looks like.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of speak to the next phase, if that's okay, to sort of the story, if the other folks are okay with that. Yeah, so as was mentioned, so tribes are asserting, right, in that process, those unceded rights and the power and need for tribal stewardship. But really, as Shauna kind of mentioned, tribes need capacity to do that, right? And so that's a struggle, building capacity, building programmatic sustainable capacity, right? And so there was a big sort of focus on that as the MLPA shifted to doing the scientific baseline studies. And we really saw it as an opportunity to try to guide that work in a way that would build tribal capacity, but also address some of the needs of the tribes. And Toloadani Nation was a big leader in that work in doing some of the baseline studies in collaboration with academia, and JTEC was on staff at that time and helped build those programs out. And then We also did a traditional knowledge project in collaboration with several tribes. And that was really the first time the state, at least in the marine space, and perhaps in natural resource management as a whole, had really looked at Indigenous traditional knowledge as a viable, quote, science that should be considered in state processes. So that was sort of another way to sort of push that needle forward in doing that work. So like I said, capacity is huge, right? Tribes, often live from grant to grant. And we really needed to think of a way to try to get funding long-term where tribes can really build out their programs in a self-determined way. And that's when 3 years ago, we launched the Tribal Marine Stewards Network with several partner tribes to try to build that capacity. And then a lot of work went into learning from others too. So there was several years where we did a lot of outreach to folks up in British Columbia and Australia and got to visit those places and learn from them and try to figure out how do we take that work home with us. And one of those concepts was protecting and claiming sort of a very clear area, which became our IMSA. So I could go into a lot more detail there, but I don't want to dominate. I want to let others share. So I don't know, Jaytuck, if I can put you on the spot, if there's anything sort of you want to share about the work at Tolowadeni Nation in particular that led you guys to sort of come to this place with the other tribes.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit of that. Like Megan mentioned, out of the MLPA process, we were really able to build capacity in our natural resources department. It pretty much out of that initial, when I first started in, I think that was 2013, we had a very small, pretty much an EPA department in natural resources. So through this and working with the baseline monitoring for the MLPA process, we were able to then build our marine program. And then, since it's grown into other programs within the department. We have a fisheries program and then a habitat and wildlife program and continue the EPA and other things. But, like Megan mentioned, this all started kind of on just conversations and a thought. We reached out to, learning through marine planning on what the folks were doing in, Canada and the First Nations up there, and then learning through that process through, where they got their idea for their Guardian Watchman program, that they learned from the Indigenous people of Australia, the Land and Sea Rangers. So, we were thinking about how we could bring this back to the States and how we could bring back to empower our own tribes. And that is then how the Tribal Marine Stewards Network came to be. Learning from what they've done up there and down there in the South. So for me, this is important because I started as an idea and then as staff, and it just builds our bond as tribal people. We're up in the north of the Yurok people, but the ocean is a shared space, and we all need to, speaking for my tribe, we were ocean going people. We had redwood dugout canoes. We were up and down the coast. I think we were on the water more than we actually realize. Nowadays, it's kind of hard for people to believe that we would paddle out in 20-man canoes and cruise up and down the coast and protect those resources and utilize those resources that are on the water and along the coast. So for me, it just brings us back to I'll just say I'm a traditionalist. You know, I mean, I grew up doing ceremony, you know, raised traditionally, and this just builds that bond that we have lost over time, you know, through colonization. And, you know, our people have all got, you know, for the most part, got along, and we're friends and intermarriage and all that. So to me, it brings us back to where we were and where we should be as tribes, and now in this new age of you know, federal governments and tribal councils, kind of bringing us back to that focus and that bond and strengthening that. We've always done this. You know, to give you guys a little background, when the MLPA process came through, they pretty much pushed a marine protected area in our area right off our tribal land, and we just had to deal with it. And because it wasn't, you know, I don't know how to say it, but we live with it now, and that's where, you know, specifically where my family still continues our traditional fish drying of smelt, which, as you guys can see behind my screen, is an idea of what that resource is, if you don't know what that is. And we continue that and have continued that forever. So this just strengthens that, and, you know, solidifies our continued presence on the water, on the beach, and the protection of these resources, and a way of life. And I'll leave it at that for now.
And then can I just add something? Just piggybacking off of what Megan said and what Councilmember Steinruck said. You know, so the Marine Life Protection Act initiative happened a long time ago, and we made a lot of progress. And then in 2020, Megan was really the architect behind the creation of the Tribal Marine Stewards Network. Everybody that was involved in the learning and the traveling to the other places, Australia and up into the First Nations, were also, you know, a big part of this. But in 2020, she was able to bring together tribes, the state, which was phenomenal, and then funders. And so that, you know, that sort of little, it was like a mini think tank about, you know, how do we continue to work together and also help create the space for tribes to return, you know, into these environments where we've always been, but in this more management capacity. And so the Tribal Marine Stewards Network was born. And like Megan said, that's the capacity side. This is where we are training our young people, where we're sharing the Indigenous traditional knowledge that we have when it comes to stewarding the resources that we've stewarded for, you know, forever. But that piece is also so important, you know, the building blocks, the foundation, which led then to the designation of the IMSA.
Yeah, and I just to add kind of onto that a little bit, and I think this was kind of touched on by a few folks, but you know, tribes often get in this space of reacting, right? Reacting to federal initiatives, reacting to state initiatives. And I think the power of this IMSA is its tribes designating this on their own, under their own sovereignty, and not sort of caring or waiting for some other government to acknowledge it or approve it or fit in the state or federal box, right? So I think it's pretty powerful in the resolutions, in the remarks of the chairperson on California Native American Day. that the tribes really don't seek permission to do this, right? Tribes do have the sovereignty to do this under their tribal constitutions. And that is how this has been designated. And I think that can catch folks at state agencies a little off guard. And that's a good place to be, I think, because we talk a lot about co-management, and we've been pushing this concept for many, many years. But I think in the state's mind, co-management still means they are in control, and they will collaborate in minor ways with tribes, but it's not true shared decision-making. And that's what tribes are talking about when they talk about co-management. It's true shared decision-making. And so I think for the state to be in this uncomfortable place is a good thing, because then it forces those conversations, right? And to figure out collaboratively, what does this mean? And I think it's very powerful for tribal governments to come together, to also collaborate and figure out together, what does this mean, right? And how do you share this space? Going back to a more traditional concept, as Councilmember Steinruck mentioned, because I think, you know, through colonization and the creation of tribal governments, unfortunately, tribal governments sometimes get in a competitive space, right? Asserting territory, seeking funding, political power, whatever that might be. Tribal governments sort of get forced into this like colonial space often, right? Because they're having to work within these federal and state sort of institutional mindsets. And so I think this is, you know, this is an attempt, this is our way of trying to take it back to a more traditional mindset and really collaborate across tribal governments and do it in a way that supports one another, but also respects each tribe's sovereignty, and that they're going to do it maybe a little bit different, right? In a self-determined way. So I think that's a very powerful element of this as well. And also getting the state on board, right? So that was another big piece. You know, the state has their 30 by 30 initiative. They are trying to conserve 30% of lands and waters by 2030. The MLPA process was a very difficult one for the state of California. I don't think they are going to have the sort of ability, you know, to reopen up marine protected areas to meet their goals. So we've really tried to convey to them the notion that tribal stewardship is durable conservation, right? Tribal stewardship is durable conservation. If you let tribes steward their ancestral lands and waters, that is conservation, and you should acknowledge that as part of your 30 by 30 goals. And so I think that's a big piece too, that we got the state to understand that concept, I think, to some degree. They've adopted the concept of IMSAs in their 30 by 30 pathways document. And again, I think back to my earlier comment, I think they wanted to sort of control what that looked like, but tribes said, no, tribes are in control of this, and tribes are going to move forward with this designation. And so I think it's a testament to the tribes that are participating and their desire to collaborate and really assert their sovereignty.
So I'm just wondering, just for all of you to know that we have journalists here from all over the country. We have Alaska, Hawaii, all 4 other time zones here on the lower 48, and some from Canada. I'm not sure everyone here knows about the Indigenous Marine Stewardship area that we're talking about. And is there a map or something I could find online to share, or that one of you could share, just to show the folks on this call like where we're talking about, and just help them understand? It's great to get this history of how it came to be, but I don't think they even know what it is. So it might help just to give them a glimpse on that. And
yeah,
then
I have it up, but it says if I try to share my screen, it's disabled by the host. So
Weird, because you are a co-host.
I could just verbally give you some background
Yeah.
on idea
There
where
you
you're
go.
at, and as you pull up the map.
Okay.
You know, to give you guys an idea, you know, Tallahassee Nation territory is in Northern California on the coast, you know, from, you know, Wilson Creek to up into Oregon. So we're right on the border of California and Oregon. So if you guys get an idea of where we're all from is where the redwood trees grow. I kind of tell people that, and then they kind of understand, oh yeah, I know where you're talking about. So yeah, on that map, it shows, you know, our territory, Tallahassee Nation territory, goes south of Crescent City, in the area of Dog Gate Song or Wilson Creek. And then to our territory goes up into the invisible line of Oregon. So up to the another river called the Sixes. And it states that, I believe, no, not on this, but that gives you guys some idea of where we're.
yeah, and then just Yurok ancestral territory starts at Damnation Creek to the north, and then goes all the way down to Little River, which is just south of the town of Trinidad. So, so as Councilmember Steinrich mentioned, Tallahassee Nation territory extends far into Oregon, and as you can see, the IMSA does not. We were very deliberate about selecting the state boundary. And the purpose was, again, trying to align with the state's 30 by 30 initiative and all the work and collaboration that's been done with the state of California. So please know that this by no means is the tribe's full ancestral territories, but this is sort of a starting point to assert and protect this particular area. So it does encompass what is also known as state waters, which is 3 nautical miles out. And you have a couple areas where there's offshore rocks. So that's why there's sort of these bulged kind of areas here that go on far beyond 3 nautical miles. So it's a total of almost 700 square miles. And I'll just reiterate again, you know, most of the tribes assert ancestral waters farther to the west, but we were very deliberate, like I mentioned, in trying to align it with the states, what the state also claims is their waters, to support the concept of co-management moving forward.
I sent a couple of links to articles too, and then one does have a map in it in the chat.
Thanks, Shauna. Do we have other points of the creation of this or the history that you all wanted to touch on before we start opening up for questions?
Just that each tribe has really done an amazing amount of work in the last 14 or 15 years. And the exciting part is that we complement each other in the work that we're doing. Trinidad Rancheria purchased the Harbor properties in the year 2000, and it's 6 acres right on the ocean. And all of the infrastructure was failing when the tribe purchased the properties, and they didn't understand, it wasn't disclosed that there was hazardous waste on the property, or that the pier was failing, or that there were septic tanks that were leaching into the ocean. Within 4 years of purchasing the property, the state levied citations on Trinidad Rancheria to do massive cleanups. And in 2007, when I first came to work for the Rancheria, it was overwhelming to try and figure out how do we navigate, and how, you know, with no funding, with no capacity, how do we comply with these citations? And so it's been a journey since 2007 until current, We're actually doing our last project this year, which is another one of the mitigations for the citation. But it's a working waterfront harbor. We've been able to build a pier. We've been able to build a state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant, public restrooms, rehab the launching trolley for boats. Commercial fishermen land crab on our dock, and we help process and ship that crab off. So Trinidad Gran Sharia has really worked hard in the last 5 years, I would say, to also create a marine fisheries program. The desire's been there for 5 years. We've done strategic planning for the last 2 years. And the exciting thing is we just hired our first marine manager, and we're moving forward in a really good way. So, you know, and it's all been through tribal dollars or grant dollars. There hasn't been support from the state. So it's exciting to me to see each tribe and their journey and how we all complement each other in the various work efforts that we've done.
Yes, I also think it's great that, you know, we've been able to be part of this, and I agree with Talawa and Rizagini and the aspects of, it's all too often that the state does come to us and say, we want to work cooperatively with you, and this is what we're going to do. And this is how you're going to work with us. And tell us that. And it doesn't really give us any actual cooperative agreements or management or be able to have any say. So to be part of this was big. I was entrusted at a really young age by a lot of the people in my community to represent them, and that was it is a great honor still. And I've had the privilege to see the growth of the environmental cleanups that we've been involved in, and being able to have a functioning harbor, be able to see that evolve, be able to see the way that the state acted during some of the Marine Protected Act areas and the area of significance, and us having to go and fight and make our case to state boards on why we should have access to active and ancestral cultural areas where we traditionally fished at, because they removed us from them without asking. You know, we have to go to them. So that is big. I think this is huge, that to make this state and you're only as sovereign as you act, and to be able to make that assertion and stand by it is huge in this era, definitely. So it's definitely a privilege, and learn a lot, and be able to hopefully go forward in a good way with this plan and see it evolve. And we're very excited. Thank you.
Okay, so unless there are objections, maybe we can open the floor to questions and get this conversation going with our reporters. Journalists, you know the drill. Let me know in the chat if you have a question. And Sporthy has illustrated how to do that, so we'll let her go first. You're getting a reputation here, Sporthy, so but go for it.
Okay, thank you. So I was just curious, traditionally, federal and state, the sort of management that they have in marine areas is pretty much species focused. So they have a management plan for salmon or, seals or whatever be the case. I was wondering, is the new stewardship area that the IMSA that has come now, will the management plans change, or are they still going to be species focused, or what's going to be the difference in terms of how this stewardship is going to be going forward?
Yeah, I can try to answer that. So the tribes will be developing stewardship plans that'll outline sort of their goals and objectives within their area of interest. I will say the way that the state and feds manage is part of the problem, right? The state really doesn't, and feds do things by species, you know, a species by species sort of management approach. Furthermore, their marine protected areas really only look at fishing as one of the potential negative impacts and really doesn't acknowledge the connection between people and environment, right? And the way that I'll just speak about the state, the way that they compartmentalize management is also very problematic. So you have one agency, you know, that deals with some fish the feds deal with. You have certain rocks that the feds deal with, and below the water line, it's a different agency, you know, so the way that they compartmentalize the environment to manage it is very problematic because they don't look at things in a holistic manner, right? They also don't have agencies that really see that land-sea connection, right? So they may be doing restoration efforts on land. And we see this a lot with salmon, you know, a lot of money is invested into the restoration of rivers, but what's going on in the ocean, right? That's impacting salmon. So I think that's one of the approaches that is very powerful about tribes taking a lead is tribes don't manage in that compartmentalized way, right? They really look at the entire environment, right? How things are interconnected. And understanding those interconnections. And a lot of that is, you know, a part of what traditional knowledge speaks to and how you're supposed to act in a certain place and sort of your protocol and behavior to take care of species. So I think that's a really big piece too with trying to co-manage with the state is it really needs to be at a government level that is at an appropriate level so that we're working. How do I say this? We're working at the appropriate sort of state government level where tribes are not trying to navigate all these different agencies and what their different missions are. And often they're competing missions sometimes, right? And so that's why one of the other things that we're involved in is trying to pass legislation to codify co-management. And that would be with the California Natural Resources Agency. Because they oversee state parks, right, and Department of Fish and Wildlife and all of these agencies. Tribes really need to be able to sort of have those shared decision-making mechanisms in place at a higher sort of state government level. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I'll just say, you know, we need to get out of the way the state and feds manage because it isn't holistic, and tribes can do it better.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Did anyone else have anything to add on that?
I would just like to add, you know, yeah, it would be a more of a holistic approach and the connection of land to sea, you know, and specifically on the Tawadeni side, you know, the respect for that body of water, you know, being the ocean. We have traditional stories and protocols on how you act and how you be, you know, on the water and around the water. So, you know, that's completely different mind frame than the state and the feds, you know. It's a living being per se, you know, and it provides an abundance of life. And, you know, I just don't see how things have been managed and, you know, since contact have that view. So it's a different viewpoint, different mindset on how to manage this great body of water, you know, even if it is only, you know, 3 miles out, you know, what we've designated, it's going to be much bigger than that. It's as far as I can see, no matter where you're out on the water. Okay.
I will say too that I think the state is, I mean, they've come a long way. They want to learn. So what we're hoping is that they're going to want to get on board with us. And you know, you just talk to people who are talking about cultural fire. Well, the state's really jumped on board cultural fire. So, you know, we're hoping for the same thing here, and don't see why that can't happen.
And I'll just say one more thing that made me think about that. What Shauna mentioned is, I think the importance too of the state getting on board is important, and academia, but not in an extractive way, right? So we need the state to be on board in terms of building tribal capacity, letting tribes manage using traditional knowledge, and not the state thinking, oh, how do we use traditional knowledge to then for the state to manage, right? How do we extract information from this community for our own purposes? And so that's a really big piece with this too, is yes, the state needs to acknowledge it, but it's again through the tribes that this needs to be expressed and exerted, right?
Yes, tribal leadership is everything in this environment.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Randy had a question.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Thanks, everybody. I'm wondering if anybody outside the process just freaked the heck out when they realized that the tribes could do this on their own initiative rather than waiting around for somebody to give them permission.
I'll speak a little bit. It's kind of nice to turn a table on say the state, you know, let them react to what we've done. And that, to me, that's we've always compromised. So it's time for the state to recognize, hey, you know, these tribes are coming together, and forcing them to have the conversations that we've been missing for a while. So I just like to just state that, you know, it's time for others to compromise and not the tribes.
I'll jump in. I'll say that I think that it was a bit of a shock, especially from some folks in the resources agency, because their questions are, how are you going to do this, right? Because they're coming from that regulatory sort of jurisdictional place that they operate from, and probably searching for, you know, what authority do tribes have to do that. We're saying we have sovereign authority. It's in our constitutions. So we can exercise that sovereignty based on our constitutions and our regulatory authority as sovereign governments. And so I think that, you know, outwardly there was a lot of sort of quiet support. Inwardly, there was probably a lot of like fear, you know, because what does this mean? What does this mean for them in terms of what sort of power do they have to give up?
As a direct answer to your question, I had at Native American Day, after the chairs made the announcement, I had a colleague and someone I really value who said, you know, Jackie, what in the heck did you guys do? You just freaked everybody out. They don't know what to make of this. So the answer to that question is absolutely. There was a very, very fearful reaction as to what this would mean and how the state would work with us.
I'm curious, following up on that, what some of the next steps you all see as being, now that you've made this designation, what are some of the first things that start rolling out as part of the protected area or work on it?
Yeah, so a critical next step will be developing an MOU between the tribes, right? That just sort of further commits the willingness to collaborate and respect one another's sovereignty and ancestral waters. And then those tribes that are interested will move forward with developing stewardship plans, as I mentioned. So that'll help us really outline the goals and objectives and what we're trying to accomplish within each tribe's particular territory. And then ultimately, the goal is, co-managing amongst the tribes, but also trying to bring the state in and co-managing with the state. And so there's certainly a some long-term goals, right, to really assert tribal stewardship and, enhance the ability for subsistence and ceremonial use in the ocean, increase monitoring activities, and try to be as responsive as we can to the communities that we live and work in and are a part of. So I think that's the other piece that's really powerful about this, is trying to elevate the voice and the concerns of the practitioners, right? The people who are on the ground relying on these resources, and oftentimes what's important to them is not important to the state or feds, right? Because they care about recreational and commercial uses and species. So I think that's another powerful piece of this, is the tribal governments are trying to be responsive to their people and elevating that.
Right, thanks. Chris had a question.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My question is more logistical. I'm wondering what kind of parameters were put into place when this was designated so that it can never be undone or not recognized by a state or fed.
So I'll say this was designated under tribal resolutions, which is law. And certainly future tribal councils could, rescind those resolutions if they so chose. So just like state and federal administrations, tribal administrations can change as well. And then I think to your question about what was put in place to, if I understood, for the state and feds to not be able to undo it, is that the second part? How do I say this? At the end of the day, in my opinion, I'm just strictly speaking from my opinion, it doesn't really matter if the state and feds acknowledge this, right? This is about the tribes and their sovereignty. And so the tribes are going to move forward and do this regardless. And I think, again, that's the power of it. You sort of have to get out of that mindset of seeking permission or trying to figure out what state process, can be used for the state to acknowledge this. We have to kind of get out of that mindset and really assert it under tribal sovereignty, right? Because that was the first question some of our state colleagues asked. It's like, oh, well, what route are you going to go for the state to acknowledge? It's like, that's not our problem to figure out. If that's your problem. And, if you want to do that in consultation with the tribe's more than willing to walk alongside you with that. But that doesn't legitimize this IMSA. What legitimizes it is that the tribes designated it. That's it. And so I think that's a piece, is like checking our own colonial sort of way of thinking.
Thank you.
Brianna, go for it.
Hi, thank you all for your time and presentations. One other aspect I think of often with colonial ways of doing things is the state and the feds just talk about how expensive everything is, management and cleanup, and that's always the excuse for not doing things. And so in addition to sort of asserting sovereignty and taking the leadership of this project, how are you thinking about kind of how can the state and the feds be financially responsible for undoing all the harm that has been done to these areas without involving them in the leadership and the decision making?
Megan, you want me to start? So with the capacity piece, which is the Tribal Marine Stewards Network, and some of the other work that Trinidad Rancheria, for example, is doing to build their capacity. The capacity piece, when we first started, we let the state know from the very beginning that if they're going to fund this, because they're funding it, that we need some sort of dedicated funding. And so we've been pushing dedicated funding and shared decision-making for a very long time. So one aspect is to continue to work with the state to get dedicated funding. But the other piece is to figure out how to fund this ourselves. And they've done this up in the First Nations through the development of an endowment. And so, we're looking at all aspects of creating long-term sustainability in order to support this. But we don't want to let the state off the hook either. And so if they're going to be true partners, then, we're asking them to continue to help fund it. And I'll let Megan answer if she's got anything else to add.
No, I think that's right. It's, and I don't mean to flippantly say like, well, we don't care what the state's, in like a flippant way. I meaningfully say it in terms of asserting sovereignty, right? And the state, like Jackie mentioned, the state through the California Fish and Game Commission and under a lot of Jackie's leadership has, come up with a vision and definition for co-management. Right? They say they want to do that. They have developed the Truth and Healing Council. Some of you may know Governor Newsom a few years ago issued an apology for the role of California has played in the genocide of Indigenous peoples and some of the sort of continued legacy of that. And now has initiated a Truth and Healing Council to kind of try to find ways for reconciliation. Newsom has also issued an executive order that, it was administrative policy that encourages agencies and departments to work with tribes, particularly in their ancestral lands and waters. And so we're just trying to make the state accountable to the policies that they have enacted, right? And they've enacted them a lot because of tribal leadership and advocacy, certainly. But we're just trying to hold their feet to the fire. And a piece of that is funding, right? So it is important we bring them along, certainly. And if they want to truly act the way they speak, that comes with money in a way. And so that's what we've tried to continue to work with them on is how do we get programmatic state funding while also bringing philanthropic interest to bring financial support. So it can sort of be this collaborative piece. But yeah, so that is a big piece and overcoming some of the challenges with state funding, right? And so we've really tried to work with our partners to identify some of those things. So we get out of a grantor-grantee relationship and more into, again, sort of a collaborative partnership relationship, similarly to ideally what some of the tribes have who have self-governance status with the federal government.
I'd like to add to that as well. Agree with everything Shauna and Megan just said. But what I've watched, I was nominated and appointed to the Fish and Game Commission in 2013. And that was a result of our work, Trinidad Rancheria's work during the Marine Life Protection Act, that 3-year period. And what I realized is we're teaching the state. They don't have any clue, and they did not, and they're beginning to get a clue, but in the past they had no clue on how to communicate or work with tribal nations, with tribal governments, with tribal people. The tribes were turned away when they would come to the department or the commission when they needed help. And the most important thing that I felt my role was was to extend their voice and to be, responsive. But I recall one of my first meetings, a tribal chairman said, "We need help." He was from the Manchester band, and they kind of dismissed him. And I paused the meeting and I said, I want to circle back to what this chairman said. And so in extending that voice for tribal nations at this Fish and Game Commission level, they've had to listen. And now the department doesn't bring anything up without telling me during a meeting, oh yes, we worked with the tribes. Whether they're just trying to check a box or if they really did work with the tribes, it's a case by case thing. But the network that we've created, we have a voice, we're teaching the state, and they're learning. And they have a long ways to go. There's still pockets of institutional racism and discrimination within the state institutions. But they realize that the tribes are united, that we are working together. And we're also working on subsistence harvest. But what Megan and Shauna are saying is we don't, and our tribal chairs, we don't seek permission. We're going to move ahead and work on these regardless of how the state responds. So it's been a collaborative effort through various tribal leaders and organizations to move this, governments rather, to move this effort forward. So for us, it's the natural next step of the work we've already done.
All right, thanks. Tom had a question.
Yeah, real simply, the 5th National Assessment, Climate Assessment came out today. And with each report, the evidence grows about the changing climate and the effects that are happening. And of course, oceans are a big part of that. I just wondered if you could address how, how this, our changing climate is being addressed in what you're doing there.
Do you want me to add a little bit? I mean, just continue on. One of the programs or projects that we do is tied to at the Tahlowahdanni Nation Marine Program is the Tides Project, where we actually image. So it's to answer your question, we're going to continue the work that we've started. Hopefully we will see the effects of climate change over time with this certain project where we actually take a shot of the rocky intertidal area and see how sea level rise and change affects those resources. So on a Western side, science side, that's how we can continue that effort.
Okay, I just didn't know if you had any other examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously we're all seeing impacts from climate change. And I know when we did the Indigenous Traditional Knowledge Baseline Project a few years ago, we, interviewed many tribal citizens from the tribes that participated. And, they were seeing change in when species were coming in, right? They were feeling warmer oceans, concern about pollution, water quality, sea level rise. So people on the ground, the practitioners, again, are seeing these changes. And we need to try to figure out ways to be responsive to that. And part of it is doing scientific monitoring, right? As JTech mentioned, the Tides Project is pretty remarkable in terms of tribes really advancing some of this work in a pretty unique way. And I encourage you guys to look into that because it's pretty amazing. But again, tribes are driving it and driving the priorities that are being looked at. And I think that's kind of what I spoke to earlier too, of the people really driving some of this work and how we're trying to be responsive to it. And I think that's a big piece of this, right? We have offshore wind that is being contemplated off of our coast here in Northern California. They already have 2 leases that have gone out to sale. They are looking at offshore wind in Toledo Nation territory up in Oregon. So we're unsure of the impacts of that. We're seeing ocean acidification issues. We've had kelp forests, complete loss of kelp in our area and the detrimental impacts from several species from that. So we're seeing these impacts. And there needs to be some concerted and collaborative way to try to address these. And one of them is, developing these relationships and being able to identify species that are concerned to many tribes to try to start doing research and figuring out ways to try to protect these important species and places. So, and I think, unfortunately, tribes, are probably the ones most impacted from climate change, but also hopefully using traditional knowledge can also sort of be leaders in trying to find ways to address it and better understand it. And I think, having that very long-term traditional knowledge is extremely valuable for many reasons. But I think with the MLPA, we noticed in particular, they're looking at baseline as of 5 years ago as a benchmark. And we know that that is not a healthy time period, right? We need to understand what's gone on over many, many generations. And you're not going to get that information and knowledge without traditional knowledge, right? Coming from Indigenous people. So that knowledge needs to be elevated in these spaces as we try to address these very complex questions in regards to climate impacts.
All right. Thank you, guys. So Haley is up next with a question.
Hi, thanks so much for everybody's time today. It's been really interesting. Megan, when you were talking about that kind of compartmentalization between land and water, I found that really interesting. And if there's some time, I'd like to hear a bit more about that. It's very similar. I work in Canada and it's the same kind of divide between terrestrial and marine. So for this project, is there like a terrestrial or a land element? And how do you see that gap being bridged moving forward? It's so kind of fundamental to land management, it seems like, in the US government and in Canada. How do we change that and move towards more holistic view of protected areas?
Well, I think, for the tribes, I think it's just in the way that programs are built, right? And the work that we're doing. So I know for here at Rezaghini, we have a lot of fisheries restoration efforts happening here on the reservation. So just to give you guys an idea, Rezaghini is located right at the top of the Klamath River estuary is where the reservation is. And so right on the Klamath River. And many of you may know that there's a huge dam removal effort going on right now in the Klamath to take out 4 dams upstream. And so the tribe's been very involved in that effort and also better understanding how to advocate policy changes for increased river flows to help fish, and then do a lot of fisheries restoration planning on land. And so trying to always be aware of those efforts and how they're tied in with our marine work is critical, right? And a lot of that is in the way that we build programs. We tried, at least here, trying not to compartmentalize between marine and terrestrial and really understand that, our resource specialists all need to work collaboratively. They're involved in all of these different projects. And so just trying to do it in the way that we're, again, institutionalizing some of this work. So that I can just speak, here on behalf of Rezaghini in terms of that, though.
Anyone else want to chime in on that? All right, Bowman, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing with us today. I had a question going back to the stewardship plans, the tribal stewardship plans. I was just curious if you envision there being a public facing aspect to those plans, and if you have thoughts on just the process of balancing maybe educating groups like the state who may want to learn from your approach while also maintaining your own data sovereignty and preventing some of that extractive piece from the state.
Does anybody else want to jump in? I have thoughts, but I don't want to talk.
Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, so in my mind, there would be a public facing element to this, right? And that's how you get to sort of goals, objectives, what the tribe is trying to accomplish. And I think that's a lot of the work that we've tried to do around Indigenous traditional knowledge is really ensure that none of that confidential information is shared outside the tribe. So we've done a lot of work in that space in sort of how do you then take that to institutionalize that knowledge? And hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but I did formerly work for Tallawahd Nation, and there we were able to develop a harvest title where essentially we use traditional knowledge to then develop that into a title that regulated subsistence and ceremonial uses. So it was a way to rely on that knowledge without sharing too much, re-educate some citizens on best practices. And so I could see something similar with a stewardship plan where very high level it's shared, right? So that the state is aware of sort of those objectives, but always keeping the traditional knowledge really internally within the tribe, because you're right, tribal data sovereignty is extremely important. And that's why you really, again, this co-management concept is really getting the state to understand, like, tribes have been managing forever. That's at an individual level, a family level, a village level, now at a tribal government level. The state manages their citizens. The tribe should be able to manage their citizens and come to some agreement that, you're going to do that collaboratively. So I think that can happen in a way that still protects the tribe's, data sovereignty, traditional knowledge in a respectful way.
Okay, it sounds like Megan got to field that one. So
I've got an add-on real quick.
Oh, good. Okay.
A good example is Trinidad Rancheria is entering into an MOU with Cal Poly Humboldt, and we have been involved in government-to-government consultation regarding our marine fisheries program. And there will be a lot of other work that's done in addition to that. But we were just talking about the data sovereignty. And the MOU is general, but we will have specific addendums that are attached to that as we move forward with various projects and work. But we're going to have an addendum that's built in for data sovereignty. And so I think that's super important for any agreements in moving forward with the state, is to have a very strong data sovereignty agreement that we have to have that executed before we can work with the state. I know Megan and Sean have done that with other projects as well.
All right, thanks for adding that. So we have time for one last question, maybe, or we have one last question, and that is coming back around to Sporthy again. Thanks for your patience, Sporthy, but you can go for it.
Thank you. Setting an example from here in Canada, among the many benefits of such Indigenous stewardship has been adding and filling the data gap that federal agencies have with respect to species on the coast. So I was wondering, what is your opinion on how good the data that California state and probably the feds have with respect to different species on the California coast, and how do you envision the stewardship program can it maybe help it or enhance it, or work in tandem with it? Any thoughts around that? Or do you have any particular programs focusing on that to fill the data gaps?
I have a response. Go ahead. I have a response to that. There's tremendous data gaps. The state does not have, they have indicated they do not have the resources or the funding. Especially on the North Coast, the data gaps are incredibly apparent. So one of our hopes is to really begin to work on the tribal data, Western science, as well as traditional knowledge, and to be able to fill in some of those gaps. And that was a big point during the MLPA process as well. And I really appreciated what Megan said about, the 5-year plan, looking at the marine protected areas. It's not going to tell the whole story. So as this process unfolds, as a young tribal member, students, and then hopefully they return to the tribe, hopefully what we can do is set a footprint with the work that this administration, this tribal administration and tribal council is doing for the next 20 years. So creating that foundation for the tribe and also intertribally will help address those data gaps. They're glaring. I always ask at meetings, where's your data? And other stakeholders or tribes are coming in with data. And so that coordination between the department and the tribes is super important, and for Western science and the department scientists to accept tribal data. So, part of the pieces we've all been working on, but one I see every other month where they're shutting something down, but they don't have the data, where they're making decisions without the data.
Yeah, and I'll just add, the North Coast in particular, as Jackie mentioned, has significant data gaps, right? We're in a very rural part of the state. And so, for example, with Rocky Intertidal monitoring, the state was funding people to come 7 to 8 hours away from the university they were at, right, to do Rocky Intertidal monitoring. We had a tribe that literally that was their doorstep. And they're out there all the time. And so it doesn't really make sense from a data perspective, from a financial perspective, for many reasons, right? Why the state wouldn't want to invest in that tribe who is right there and can more easily collect that information. So that has been a big piece. And then kind of what I mentioned earlier about the species too, that the state is concerned about. We have Eulacon that used to run on the Klamath and Redwood Creek that people really haven't seen since the 80s. And it's a very, very important species culturally. And so the tribe has started to collect eDNA to look for those fish. And so that's just sort of an example of a data gap that exists that the tribe can help fill for a very culturally important species that the state might not even be considering at all. And I know at Tolowadeni Nation, they've been doing a lot of that work as well. I don't know if if there's anything that Councilmember Steiner would like to add about that.
Yeah, I could add a little bit, we are, a species of concern, all of them are of concern, but, specifically, our surf smelt or lumsh is nobody not that people don't care, but no, not enough attention was given to that specific species. And that's a major concern for our people. Because we have seen declines in those numbers and runs over the years. I've been doing it my whole life. I'm now 44. I have that knowledge of what I've seen in my time. My mom, my dad, my aunts, they have that knowledge of their time and then passed on down generation. So that would show the state and the feds, this is an important species. It's a forage fish. People tend to care a little bit more now when it affects the bigger fish, say our salmon and our other marine mammals and seabirds and that kind of thing. Without that basis of, the food chain, we won't have those other mammals and birds and fish. So, and it's to add, we are on the beach, it's more eyes and ears and what we see change on a daily basis. And, even on an enforcement side, not that we would be law enforcement, but we'd be more education and outreach, and then could then inform those state, and federal agencies that this is what is going on and this is the activities that are happening out there on our water, on our shoreline, on our coast.
Thank you, everyone. That was helpful.
All right. Well, on that note, we've come to the end of our session, everybody. Thank you to all of you for joining us. That was an awesome overview of what's, I think, just a really cool story and something that's going to be keeping the attention of the folks on this this workshop for a long time to come as new things come out from the stewardship area. So to Chairperson Murphy and Megan and Shauna and Council Member Steinruck, Vice Chair Hempstead, Jackie and Amy, all of you, thank you for spending some of your day with us. It's very